Hi, my name is Pop. I am making a tutorial about the hidden messages in Carl Sagan's Contact. He wrote this novel, Contact, which was also made into a science fiction movie starring Jodie Foster and Matthew McConaughey and several other fine actors and actresses. There are some hidden stories behind the story, and then there's some anecdotes, and I would like to tell you about those in this video. It's very entertaining. The first time I ran into Carl Sagan, I think it was on the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson and Ed McMahon. In those days everything was black and white, and they had the same people on the Tonight Show every night. There would be a singer, a comedian, an actor, a guy plugging a movie, and then suddenly they bring on an astronomer, inexplicably. I mean, it just did not seem like it fit. Well, they were mercilessly belittling the guy. He was wearing a turtleneck sweater, and it made him look like he had a big head. And now he is a caricature, and you can see him on the Big Bang Theory there. And they were making fun also of the way which he spoke. He had sort of a Bronx accent or a Queens accent, and he would say such things as the fundamental particles of the universe, and the billions and billions of stars in our galaxy, and the billions of galaxies. Now, I did not put those in quotation marks because there is some question whether he actually did say those things on the Tonight Show, but these things are attributed to him. Now, he became almost a regular on the Tonight Show, and he wrote many science books, and he became very well-to-do, and justifiably so, and very popular, and justifiably so. And if you look at the bottom right, Cosmos, he ended up making a PBS multi-part documentary, and that was his most famous thing that he did. Cosmos is to this day one of the great videos that you can watch, and it's about astronomy, but it gives you this total sense of wonder about the universe. Now, he wrote one science fiction story, and the cynic in you might say, well, you know, he was just cashing in on this. Well, I don't think so. That's what I'm going to be talking about. Now, he actually had intended to make it as a movie, and then the movie got delayed. That's not uncommon, and he came out with it as a book, and then they made the movie, and actually he passed away from cancer, I think, before the movie was ever finished. Now, the movie does not follow the book 100%, and there's a hidden story, and that's what I'm going to talk about. It's not your garden variety science fiction story either. There's no flying saucers, ray guns, killer robots. There's no monsters after our women, and they don't invade the earth. But there are some aliens in the movie, but they really don't show them like this. This is the concept of a story within a story, a framework around a story, and this has been done so many times in literature. Here is 1001 Arabian Nights, and the framework worked like this. You've got your sultan, and he's a bad guy. Every night he gets a new concubine, and well, after they go to bed he kills her, and then the next night he gets a new concubine. He's a really bad guy. Well, this concubine Scheherazade, she figures out a way to stay alive. She begins a really, really good story. She's a great storyteller, and then she falls asleep. Well, the next morning the guy's just got to know the end of the story. So that evening she finishes that story and starts another, and she keeps it up 1001 Arabian Nights, and that's where we get Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, Sinbad, and the genie and the flying carpet, and so forth. Another example of a story inside of a story is the Canterbury Tales. These pilgrims are going to Canterbury in England, and each of them tells a story. The trip itself is the framework around the story. So we've got this idea of a message inside of a message and a story behind a story. I know that seems contradictory, but I'm going to explain both of those things. And where's the best place to hide something? Well, in plain sight. Here you've got a message, and you end up having a message inside of a message. And in this story, Contact, actually you had a message inside of a message inside of a message. And he brought up this old medieval word called palimpsest. Now, you've seen these kind of dolls where you open up the big doll and there's a littler doll inside, and it comes apart as well, and there's a smaller one inside, and it just gets smaller and smaller. Well, in this story, he uses that term not in its original sense. In medieval times when they made books, it was very, very expensive, and they did not print on paper. They printed on thin sheets of leather called vellum, and books were so very expensive that they didn't throw anything away. They would bleach the page and then rewrite over on top of it. And today scholars will take a book and they'll x-ray it, and they'll say, my gosh, this is a boring book we got here, but look what's underneath it, a very, very important book. They erased the important book, which we can now read with our x-ray machine, and so on. Well, let me tell you the story then. And this is surprising. It's not in the movie at all. You got a mom, a dad, and a kid. And the kid's a little girl. And the little girl grows up to be an astronomer. And she is the protagonist of the story. And her name is Ellie. And that's kind of strange. I wondered often, well, why in the world would Carl Sagan have depicted himself as a female? In those days, in the late 70s, it was very popular in movies to depict a strong female. That could have been it. But then, you know, it could be a literature device. And now, I have to deviate a little bit. You all took literature in high school or college, and this is your literature teacher, and he's a real arrogant SOB. I mean, he's seeing symbolism in all kinds of stuff, and I mean, this dude works for the government and he's got tenure and never had a real job or anything, and look at his attitude. Well, I hope I'm not doing that. I hope I'm not reading something into this story that really doesn't exist. But let me say this. If it's not real, at least it is a theoretical construct that works. Now, you know, and I know, and everybody knows that the Earth is not flat, it's spherical. Nevertheless, I can use the flat Earth theory very well in my map in the car to get across town. The theoretical construct does not necessarily have to have a one-to-one correspondence with reality in order to function well. So, maybe that's all I got. Let's go on. Here you've got a dad, a mom, and a daughter, and the daughter, as I say, that's Carl Sagan, right? And you've also down here got a boyfriend and later on a stepfather. Well, whenever in literature you have a female, it's quite often that, you know, you're showing the protagonist's weak side or feminine side. But like in Hamlet, Ophelia represents Hamlet's feminine side. She went crazy, drowned herself, and that released Hamlet to open up his masculine side to avenge the death of his father. So I mean, there's an example that everyone kind of agrees on in literature. Now, in this story, Ellie's father was a guy who owned a hardware store, and he was very touchy-feely, and his love knows no bounds, and he deals with the plumbing and lighting and wiring of the universe. And I'm saying this dude is like God to Ellie and to Carl Sagan. And when Carl Sagan was little, he thought of God as the owner of a hardware store, a God who knew about the lights of the lighting of the stars and the wiring of the stars and the plumbing of the stars. And that was God. So I'm putting God up there next to the father, and Carl Sagan here is playing the daughter. Now, boom, guy falls over dead. Little girl's 10 years old. So, you know, the mom remarries. She remarries a stepfather, and, you know, the stepfather is not at all like the father. This guy is a cold person. I mean, he is a scientist. He teaches physics at the university. He's a professor. And I mean, and what little girl likes her stepfather? I mean, that's a lose-lose situation, but we see it all the time. Later on, I'll bring in the boyfriend. The mom, she really at this point doesn't have much in the story. She really is kind of just written in as a device. But here's the stepfather. Oh my Lord. He is cold. He's scientific. He's emotionally hands off. But he's not a bad guy. He's just not a bad guy. And I've got them all in place now, except for the boyfriend. And I want to now discuss what was cooking. She needs to make a career choice. She's teenager. She going to go into science, or she's going to become a mom, whatever. And the stepfather, actually, he's a pretty good father. He says to her, "Look, I see you growing kind of cold and morose, like me. I think you should go to the malt shop, go on dates, have slumber parties, go to the sock hop, stuff like that." But what does she do? Does she listen to him? No. She picks the worlds of the stepfather, and she goes into the search for extraterrestrial intelligence. Guess what, ladies? It's got a glass ceiling even in science. Luckily, the glass ceiling in astronomy is transparent and you can poke a telescope through it, but nevertheless you sully your reputation if you go into SETI, at least in this story. Nobody takes you seriously. You are looking for little green men in outer space. Or are you? Or are you looking for your father? Are you looking for God? At this point she meets a religious man. Now, in the story, she's a hard-boiled atheist, or at the very least she is a cold agnostic, and she only believes in stuff that she can deal with mathematically or pick up and evaluate through the lens of science. But she meets this guy, and he's like a young Billy Graham type, and he's very touchy-feely like her dad too. But he's very intellectual, and they are attracted. Opposites attract. And he says such things as, "I cannot imagine a universe without a God to have created it all." Well, she has a lot of intellectual arguments with him and with an older version of himself who is also quite popular. And she says stuff like, "Well, you know what? The Bible really doesn't talk about anything with science. I mean, why didn't God lay out some truths for us?" And they look at her like she's stupid, and they say, "Well, he did. It's just not scientific truth." But she can't see anything beyond scientific truth. She is unable to even think except for in scientific mode. So now I gotta go into the story about SETI. Now, here's Enrico Fermi, who worked on the atomic bomb. They're sitting around eating lunch one day, and they're talking about, I wonder if there's any little green men out there. And he says, "Probably not. Where is everybody?" And they say, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "Well, given that the universe is X number of years old, and given there's X number of stars, at this point, had there been anybody out there, they would have already contacted us." Now, Carl Sagan was concerned about something besides just science. He was concerned by inner, I don't know, it's not doubts. I think he felt kind of secure by religion, but he was bothered by it too a little bit. He did have skepticism. That's what a trained scientist does. And he says that his parents taught him how to have both skepticism, but also maintain this sort of religious sense of wonder. Now, here's this Fermi paradox. Oh, I mean, he just says, gosh, there should be somebody out there at this point. Enough time has passed. There's enough stars. So why are the little green men not contacting us if they're already out there? Carl Sagan was worried about all of this. He was not an atheist. He is depicted in popular culture as being an atheist, but he was definitely not. And he's saying an atheist is someone who's certain that God does not exist. And he's saying, no, that's not him. And he is talking about the nature of God, though, and he sounds like an atheist because, he's saying, wow, I just don't believe in this popular depiction of God. I'm looking for something greater than this. Then he started thinking, whoa, what about all this science fiction stuff? Is this nonsense? This science fiction stuff, is this just entertainment? But science fiction stuff is sort of, I don't know, I guess it's deep philosophy. Some of it is, and some of it is deep religion. And there's this old idea in science fiction about a self-reproducing mechanical device that kills living things. And I guess you've all heard about the Drake equation, where he put into a formula how many civilizations should be just in our own galaxy. And it's quite high a number. There's thousands and thousands of civilizations that should have already contacted us, but we don't see them. Now, when the father died, the guy that owned the hardware store, that was a turning point in the life of Ellie. And you could see that she had a regular upbringing, and she got a grandma perhaps, and the grandma is teaching her all the old values. And she would be telling her the Bible stories. Hey grandma, tell me the story about David and Goliath, then Noah and the ark, then Jonah and the whale. And those are wonderful stories. And then what happens? Well, the hardware store guy dies. Well, in Carl Sagan's case, that was when he went to the library. And in the case of some kids, that's when they went to the Natural History Museum. He said he developed this sense of wonder, and it never left him. This astronomy. Now, there's a famous science writer and science fiction writer, and Isaac Asimov, and he's passed away now. He's the guy who wrote I, Robot, among other stories. And he had a PhD in biochemistry, and he wrote the biochemistry textbook for the medical school where he taught. And he is, the term for him and guys like him is a polymath. A polymath is a guy that knows about all areas of human endeavor. And he said there's only two guys that surpassed him, and the other one was Marvin Minsky, the computer scientist, and me, Pop. So, how many people have lost sight of God through the lens of a telescope or a microscope, or looked at dinosaurs or looked at calculus? Is that what is happening? I'm gonna look at it in terms of these Venn diagrams, these overlapping circles. Where they overlap, you got stuff in common. Where they do not overlap is stuff where they are not in common. Here is science, and here is religion. And a lot of people are saying, well, science is covering up religion. But other people are saying, no, 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 they mostly agree, and it is just on the fringes there, down at the bottom, where religion doesn't understand this one small area of science. Perhaps it has to do with historical knowledge. And then up there at the top, the religious stuff and the science, they just don't yet overlap, but someday they may. But I'm saying that's wrong, and here's why. We don't even try to say that military truth and religious truth, or business truth and religious truth, overlap. We don't even go there. Let me give you an example about military truth. The old soldier, the veteran, will look at the young new recruit and he'll say, hey, look, kid, if you want to stay alive, here's what you got to do. If you can salute it, kill it, paint it, or eat it, it exists. If you cannot do one of those four things, it does not exist, and ignore it. And then you'll stay alive. That's military truth. Or how about legal truth? We run into this all the time. Let's say the defendant got let off scot-free on a technicality, even though we all know he's guilty. And then business truth. They shut down the Houston store even though it was the single most profitable store in the United States because, they eliminated the Southwest region since the Southwest region was losing money. So what is the relationship between science and religion? And he said, well, they're not only compatible with spirituality, it is the source, that science is the source of spirituality. And he said that's the relationship. And he found a word, it's an old word, it's like the word luminous, but you throw away the L and put in an N, and it goes back to a book in German, Das Heilige, the Holy, from 1917, written by Rudolf Otto. And he said, numinous stuff is stuff that is making you feel supernatural, sacred. I mean, it just knocks you out. And you can find it in your own realm of endeavor. It's not just a religious thing. You can feel this religious feeling in whatever work you're in, whatever line you are in. So, losing sight of God through the lens of a microscope or a telescope is not what's happening to the scientist. Now I put Carl Sagan here with the telescope and Lynn Margulis in front of the microscope. Lynn Margulis was his first wife. He got married a couple of times, 3 times, and she is part of this like rest of the story. She's passed away now, and her story goes back to the early 60s. She was looking at cells through a microscope, the big cells, the real cells, the eukaryotic cells, not those little teeny tiny ones like bacteria called prokaryotic cells, which are much, much smaller and thought to be much, much older. And in those days they did not have a scanning, tunneling electron microscope. The best resolution they could get was hanging oil drop. And they were looking at stuff inside the cells, and they said, well, they're kind of like organs, and we'll call them little organs, organelles. And they have beautiful names, and they were describing them and drawing pictures of them. Mitochondria, Golgi apparatus, endoplasmic reticuli, lysosome, ribosome, chloroplast. And you can just see how someone would walk into her office and they would look through the microscope there and they say, hey, you contaminated this cell. What you mean? Well, some bacteria got in it. And then she looks in there and she says, no, that's what we thought too, but we're calling them mitochondria, or we're calling them chloroplasts. And the guy says, well, if it looks like a duck, quacks like a duck, hey, it's a duck. So there are these inclusions inside of the cell, and that got her to thinking, and she said, oh my Lord, that's correct. These things inside the eukaryotic cell are prokaryotic cells. They're living in some kind of state of symbiosis inside the cell. The bacteria entered the cell and said, hey, if you'll feed me and protect me, I'll do this for you. Wow. In other words, the eukaryotic cell is nothing but a great big condominium for prokaryotic cells. A eukaryotic cell is a bag of bacteria. And the implications are staggering. And one of the implications is that when a cell divides with mitosis, right down the middle, the nucleus of the cell does the ding-dong of the doo-dah with DNA, and the cell splits in two, and all of the blueprints and stuff get to the right cell or the left cell, but the mitochondria got their own replication mechanism, and it's entirely matrilineal. In other words, all of the mitochondria in your body came from your mother. Your father didn't contribute any of it, all the way back to the beginning of time. So Lynn Margulis put together this theory, and nobody believed her. She was female. There was a glass ceiling, and they ignored her, called her names, called her an idiot. And now, of course, they say, well, of course, it's true. Yes, indeed. Well, yeah, we knew that all along, I mean, she didn't really show us that, but we kind of figured that out on our own, but it goes without saying no one needed to repeat it or anything. And no, we didn't ignore her for 30 years and stuff like that. She is saying that the elephant is nothing more than a minor variation of eukaryotic cells, which have learned to differentiate and cooperate as a collection. And the really, really significant event of evolution is the development of the eukaryotic cell itself. Detail work. Dinosaurs, people, big plants, any big animal. It's just detail work. The real event of evolution is the eukaryotic cell, when those bacteria came together and cooperated. This is evolution's finest development. So what's that got to do with the little Martians and stuff? I will explain. The Martians, Ellie goes to see them. And, they make the whiz-bang machine. And she goes to see them, and they come to her in the guise of her father. I mean, the first guy, not the stepfather, but the hardware store guy. And she says, oh, I'm so grateful to see my dad again. Thanks. I know it's not really my dad and stuff. And she says, what the heck is going on? And they say, well, we're contacting you bozos on Earth. You're primitive. And she says, well, can we join your club? And they said, not yet. You're too dumb and too uneducated and too primitive. But, you will later. And she says, well, you must know lots and lots of secrets of the universe. And they kind of said, well, we're still seeking God. And we are amazed at the universe. We don't understand it. But we have found out more stuff than you. And they tell her to go back and to calculate pi to more figures, 8 gazillion figures or whatever, and they will see a picture. And I didn't draw it here because it's too many zeros and stuff, but it's all zeros, and you got a raster scansion deal, and somewhere in the bottom corner of the picture is God's signature. He made a circle. Wow. This is something that I think is fundamental to the way a scientist needs to figure something out about religion. You've got this really nasty Stephen Crane attitude towards the universe that an atheist has. A man said to the universe, sir, I exist. However, replied the universe, that fact has not created within me a sense of obligation. How sad is that? I mean, that is so sad. I just want to go off and, blech, it's just not even worth living. But you go back to the old religion, the old time religion, and that gives you a purpose and a sense of living and a sense of life. Now look at the characteristics of the dad and the stepdad. I mean, this is the hardware store god, dad. He's warm. Scientist, he's cold. Personal, impersonal, intimate, aloof, emotional, unemotional, loving. Oh, science is just not loving. Well, Ellie gets back, and here's the story that's so cool. And while she was away talking to the little green men, her mother, who had been in a nursing home, passes away of old age. And her stepfather shows up, and they're hardly on speaking terms, and he gives her this sealed envelope that had been written and sealed years and years ago. Dear Ellie, by the time you read this, I will already be dead. And so she opens it up. And it says, Ellie, I got to tell you this, if just nothing but more for biological stuff and doctor stuff. I was 17 years old, and I was like 6 months pregnant and unmarried. And I thought my life was over with when your dad, the hardware store guy, met me and fell in love with me. And despite me being pregnant, he married me anyway. And then you were born, and we never told you that he was not your dad. And he loved you very much, and I know you loved him. And then when he died of a heart attack, heck, I didn't tell you then either. I didn't want to, rock the boat. And then when I got remarried, I certainly didn't want to tell you then because, you weren't getting along with your stepdad. But now that I'm dead, I've got to tell you. The deal is, Ellie, that I got pregnant by your stepdad. He is your real father. Mr. Science is your real father. And you've been living a lie, kinda, sorta, a little bit. Even though he loved you and you loved him. But guess what? Your stepfather loves you too. Now, we've got this old idea about what the nature of God is, and there's Michelangelo, very famous. And what has happened? Well, I think that the God that we have, has mutated into the Coca-Cola Santa Claus, and then once again he's mutated one more time, into cold science. And neither one of these guys, I mean, this one's absurd, a commercial one, and then this one is cold. I think most scientists get kind of stuck. They want to ask questions, and they want to ask questions of God, but they're stuck in their language. They only can use the language of science, mathematics. They would really like to sit on grandma's knee and ask in that manner, but they've forgotten how. And I think Carl Sagan, so to speak, addressed this very difficult question that scientists have, that how do you relate to the universe if not through science? I hope you enjoyed this video. My name is Pop.